Hello, everybody. I'm back at Podcast Row here at Stand Up New York in New York City with my guest, Lisa Wang. Lisa is a USA national champion and Hall of Fame gymnast turned serial entrepreneur and motivational speaker, empowering the next generation of social leaders. She's the founder and CEO of SheWorks, the leading global platform empowering 20,000 plus women to build and scale successful companies. And they were recently acquired in 2019 by Republic, the top equity crowdfunding platform by AngelList, which Republic has been on the Pivot podcast before, also as part of Podcast Row. One caveat before we jump in, we're here in New York City and it's fun. It's like this chaotic day. There's podcasts happening left and right, all in parallel. It's a pretty cool logistical feat, if I don't say so myself. But you're probably going to hear more background noise than the usual, but it's okay. I like the energy of it. So without further ado, Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you on the Pivot podcast. And I'm just going to start from what's probably a question people throw in at the end. But you are actively training as a Krav Maga fighter, which might surprise people because you're 5'2".
Yes.
I knew that because you put it in your bio, not because I'm that good at estimating height. But what's it like? Tell me about how your interest in Krav Maga, and in a way, I like sports analogies in general. You pivoted from a background in gymnastics to Krav Maga. I would just love to hear more about it.
Yeah. This is actually a pretty recent development, so it's cool. It's actually the first time I've talked about it in public. And I call myself a serial athlete turned serial entrepreneur. And Krav Maga, I would say I came across about 2 months ago, and for those who don't know what it is, it's the art of self-defense. So it's the Israeli military defense training that all the soldiers go through, and I like to say that I'm petite but deadly, secretly deadly.
I like it.
And it's incredibly empowering. It's really fun to hit the dummies, super cathartic, and what I love most about it, though, is as someone who's been an elite athlete for over a decade of my life, and after I retired and I went to school, then I started my professional career, I really missed having that physical outlet and that rigor in terms of discipline. Of course, I worked out, but it wasn't the same because I wasn't improving upon a skill. And with gymnastics, it was always the pursuit of the next gold medal and the next podium and the next competition. And so, that was a really formative part of my childhood up to the age I was 19. But in many ways, while I was going after my own dream, it was really to satisfy other people, like my parents, my coaches and judges and the country. And I think Krav Maga is the first real sport that I've done for just myself, right? Just to learn it, just to be skilled at it, to be able to defend myself in situations if they ever do arise. But it's so empowering to do that because I want to do it, and I feel good doing it.
That's such a powerful shift to hear, and I can only imagine because I know I probably don't even know the half of it in terms of how intense life as a gymnast is. And even just hearing you say working to please your parents and the coach and the country, like no pressure. But it's true, even in business and in the happiness context, we're always talking about pursuing the shiny gold medals. You were actually pursuing shiny gold medals. It must have been, I'm just curious, was there some moment of wake up in your life where you became aware that, oh my gosh, I'm completely oriented toward pleasing other people? And when did that happen? What sparked that, if it did?
Well, my real moment of awakening was actually only a couple years ago. So I retired from the sport at this point over a decade ago, I think around 11 years ago. And so one of the most important moments of really defining moments of my life was when I was 18. And up until that point, I'd spent almost 10 years training for my ultimate dream, which was to go to the 2008 Olympic Games. And it was in Beijing. My family's from China. They'd immigrated there, and I was representing the U.S. team. And it would have been just the most defining moment of my life. And everyone thought I was going to go. I thought I was going to go. The team thought I was going to go. The federation thought I was going to go. And I ended up missing it by 0.25 tenths of a point. and at the key qualifying world championships. And it's very hard to articulate how difficult that is when your entire conception of self is built around this one dream that you've had for over a decade. And to suddenly have that shatter and no longer know what your purpose is, and that feeling of like, I don't know how to go on, and figuring out what to do next and how to pick myself up. Yeah. Wow. And so I had a really important decision to make at that time, which was that either I was going to just quit at that moment, which is the easiest thing to do, or to keep competing. And I would have to push back. I'd gotten accepted early into college, and I would have to then tell them I wasn't coming and defer a year. And ultimately, I realized that, one, I'm not a quitter, and I'm most certainly not a loser, and there's no way I can end this career on a losing, low note. And so I did the hardest thing that I knew possible, and I ended up committing to that year of I'm going to compete and become the best gymnast ever for myself. And see if I can still motivate myself, even though I know I'm not going to get that big thing that I always wanted. And so I bought a one-way ticket to the Russian Olympic Training Center in Novogorsk, which is, think of Siberia in the middle of winter, and trained with the most rigorous, coaches and gymnasts there, competed, traveled across Europe, and did my final competition 9 months later at the U.S. National Championships, where I won the all-around champion and swept every single gold medal. And I was like, all right, guys, peace. Now I'm out.
Wow.
But, and I thought, and the interesting thing is I thought that now that I'd exited on a high note, that I could close that chapter and move on. And the thing is, like, I hadn't actually moved on, and I didn't recognize that until about a couple years ago, where even, like, I couldn't watch the 2012 Olympics. I couldn't watch the 2016 Olympics. And they say it's like the things that you avoid or deflect are always the things that are most important to face. And what I didn't realize at that point was the internal shift that had happened to me when I lost the Olympics, which was that I had this internal dialogue that was really that I didn't work hard enough, I wasn't prepared enough, that I just wasn't good enough, and I would never be good enough for the world because obviously I wasn't for the Olympics. And this feeling of not enoughness is something that has permeated, I think, my existence for my entire life, but even more so as I went into college, as I started my career on Wall Street. And already, it's hard when you're a young minority woman in a place like Wall Street, and then tech and venture capital, and you name all these male-dominated industries. And it's even harder when, I think for me, there was how people saw me, which was like gold medal gymnast, like Ivy League graduate, like shiny hedge fund girl, and they're like, she's got the life. And the more boxes I checked, the greater the gap became between how the world saw me and how I felt about myself, which didn't change as I kept achieving more. And this mentality that you talk about was when the scoring system in gymnastics is really interesting, because you basically start with a perfect 10, and now it's no longer 10, it's like out of 30, but
it's like the SATs. I can't keep up now with the inflated, whatever the new SAT range is.
More ways to deduct.
That always bothered me anyway, but this is already fascinating hearing about the point system.
The system is, it starts at like where you could be, and then every move you make is a deduction. So it was like you never
as like a life strategy.
So it's you're always looking for areas you can deduct yourself, like where you can criticize yourself, and it was really a couple years ago when there was a trigger that actually made me face and really, really go back to that moment when I lost the Olympic dream, and like come face to face with that pain and that trauma and that like loss of self, and really giving myself the time and space to mourn what I lost. Before I could accept and really embrace the lessons it taught me and the blessings that it gave me for the rest of my life. And because up until then I had used this deduction mentality in every aspect of my life, which is probably why I never felt like I was good enough. And
that right there was a book, The Deduction Mentality, or it's like a chapter in the book. Because I never knew that. I never knew that gymnastics was scored that way. And then why wouldn't you develop that as your self-grading rubric? Of just the deduction mentality.
And exactly. And the thing is, when I started facing that, right, it's not like now I face it, now I see it, now I'm over it,
right?
But it was, so actually I created a podcast called Enoughness, which was really to explore that.
I wanted to ask you about that.
And in many ways it was
5-star Enoughness.
So the Enoughness podcast came out of this thing where I was like, there's first you become aware of that the trauma that you've had. Then you face it. And then I was like, the real way for me to get over this is to really, one, like, do other people feel like they're not good enough? And, like, try and normalize it. And I found that, yes, in some ways, like, the people who are more successful actually have a greater issue with it because they never feel like they're good enough, and it's never enough money or fame or whatever. And then secondly, it gave me a place to... as the more I talked about it, the more comfortable I became with my story, and instead of it being this shameful thing I would hide, it became this, it became a tool and like a strength of mine, because I was actually, someone helped me see it, that it's like, wow, what a blessing that you failed so publicly when you were so young, and learned how to get back up and not end your life after that. And when I started seeing it like that, I was like, you're right. And like, who knows where I'd be now? And then of course, like, what lessons, like, how do I now take that story to empower someone else and uplift and motivate them when they're facing that sort of failure?
I'm very fascinated by blessings in disguise and hearing people's version of that and their interpretation. And of course, in the moment, it can feel like a big offensive cliche for someone if you're going through the experience in the moment and somebody says, it's all happening for a reason, or don't worry, everything is always happening for the best, for your highest evolution. In the moment, you might want to smack them. But now looking back, what do you see? Like, and you've brought up so many powerful themes already, so maybe you've already said it, but why do you think it was, or what was it about that happening when you were 18 that either needed to happen or is the best thing that could have happened to become who you are today?
Well, there's a lot of, I thought best case scenario, I would have gone to the Olympics, and maybe then I would tour with the U.S. team. So there's always the Olympic tour for a year, and then I would have deferred another year of college, and who knows, maybe become a judge or a coach. And
you certainly wouldn't have shaken off the deduction mentality.
Yeah, I think I would have continued in that world, which is, it shaped me in terms of my discipline and focus, but I think I really needed to get out of that world. And I probably wouldn't have so quickly and abruptly shaken it off to be like, okay, I'm done, find my next thing. And so I had this deep burning desire to find my next thing because that part was painful still.
And I can't even imagine going through what you did with the pressure and the visibility. But as you said, it kind of shattered what you'd been working toward or thought you were working toward. So it almost shattered the illusion of what success was and forced you to understand who you are. And even Krav Maga now, hearing that tie in, that this is the first sport you're doing purely for yourself and for the love of it.
Yeah. And I think for the audience to understand, like, this took 10 years for me to get to this place of feeling like I'm enough and just really embracing that. And so it is such a process, and it is one of those things where you keep digging and digging and digging, to the point now that I love looking at myself and like what's wrong and being critical in a way that's productive, because I was like, every wrong decision I make, it's what can I learn from it? And that's really the definition of being anti-fragile, right? It's anti-fragile is the ability to take whatever hurts you and become stronger as a result of it.
That Anti-Fragile is one of the books that inspired me the most when I was writing Pivot, because I loved that concept as well, that resilient, the tree sways, but it doesn't break. But anti-fragile is the hydra that you lose one head, you grow two.
Yeah.
That you get stronger with this adversity. Your company, SheWorks, that you founded, has actually been on my radar for several years. So we have many mutual friends.
Awesome.
I think someone was going to introduce me a while back for an event. I always admire, like, anyone that's built up a platform as you did with 20,000 plus women is so impressive. But I'm experiencing a fork in the road, so I'm curious. You get to choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
Because I'd either love to hear about the inspiration and how you built SheWorks, or I think it's also fascinating, getting acquired is its own gold medal in the business and entrepreneurship space. And it's also a pivot, that it's a pivot for you. Your life is changing. So as much as it's a successful exit, I'm also curious what's coming up for you in the moment as you give your baby over, your business baby. And it's just a lot of people who are part of companies that get acquired, they kind of get pivoted in a way because change happens. Yeah. So you pick. You get to choose which way you want to go.
Well, I would love to talk about what's next and really the future. So handing off the baby was, I think, I was very intentional about the parents, and I think I couldn't have found a better home for SheWorks than Republic. When a big part of it was me thinking about where's the future of funding going, and I do think venture capital is it's controlled by a small homogenous group of white men. At the end of the day, over 94% of investors are still men, which results in 2.2% of the funding going to women. And I just think that most entrepreneurs should not raise venture capital. They're not building those businesses. And when I looked at Republic, I thought this is perfect. They really embody this idea of democratized funding, helping anyone who wants to get access. It's a marketing story, essentially. And you have to build real value for your community. So I think that for me is, a lot of entrepreneurs will feel this hole, some part of themselves missing when they give away their baby. And I think because of the way that we've set it up, our new managing director is amazing. She was the head of partnerships at Republic, and just when you've taken the time to intentionally choose, you know where that path's gonna go. And I think also I've been thinking a long time, pre-acquisition, about what's next for me and what my bigger vision is. And I do think, because right now we're at this moment where it is absolutely necessary to create female-only spaces and have awareness and talk about the challenges. But with Me Too, we've kind of swung too far in the other direction in terms of, caustic accusations and whatnot. And there's a lot of fear right now. So when I think about the future, I'm actually quite bearish about gender-only spaces because, again, given where we are, it's necessary. But down the road, if you have successful women and you've trained them, successful women want to be with successful people. And at the end of the day, when there's no longer the necessity, I think it's really about integration. And so I thought about, what are my strengths and what could I do? Strengths and passion, where's the intersection? And I realized that, as a literature major, I spent probably, if I wasn't at the gym as a child, I was in the library. I read the entire young adult section, I think. And it's that I think stories are probably the most important thing if we want to change the narrative. So if we want to change the way the world is operating, we need to change the leaders. If we want to change the leaders, we need to change the stories that they're perpetuating in mainstream media. And that's how you change culture. And so what I noticed is that there's two types of people who have influence, really, as individuals. There's influencers, and unfortunately there's a bad rap of shameless self-promotion and narcissism, just me. And then there's a second type of person who's doing extremely impactful work. These are social entrepreneurs, they're social investors, they're just people who have a higher purpose for themselves. And these are the people I coined social leaders. And they leverage social influence and social networks to create greater social impact. And I realized that a lot of people doing great work are not promoting themselves, or they don't know how to tell their story, and they don't know how to get the word out there. And so the same way of how I've built a really powerful personal brand platform as the founder and CEO of SheWorks that I can now leverage towards something greater, I want to teach these social leaders how to leverage social capital to build their platform so that they can become role models in and of themselves.
I love that. That's so beautifully said. And it's funny, as I was just having a debate with a friend about whether we would want to join a women's only co-working space like the Wang versus a co-ed space. And for some reason, I'm just always still drawn to co-ed spaces, but I understand the desire for the places like the Wang as well. I happen to love systems, all things business systems. I'm reading 2 great books at the moment: Clockwork, Teaching Your Business to Run Itself, and Built to Sell, which is also really good. And even if you're a solo pluspreneur like me, and I don't have any plans of going anywhere, I love the work that I do.
Sorry.
Bless you. Even though I don't have any plans of going anywhere, I always find it empowering and helpful to continue thinking about how do I elevate my systems. And selfishly, you're sitting here in front of me having sold your company, and I'm curious, what was your journey of transitioning SheWorks from something where you were probably involved in every single aspect of it all the way to getting it ready to sell? And was that hard for you? Was it hard to release control or put people in place and kind of work yourself out of a job?
Yeah. Well, I think this really goes to the timeline and the place where the founder and CEO is in their journey. Because there's obviously situations where founders are forced to sell because their investors want them to or their board wants them to. There are situations where they need to sell because they're running out of money and then they need that infusion. So there's a lot of underlying variables for why people sell. And for me, I have gotten to a place in my startup journey with SheWorks after building it for 5 years that I was like, I'm ready. You know, I'm ready to take what I've done and amplify it even more, you know, affect even more people. And this does go back to my philosophy about women-only spaces, right? I think that it absolutely needs to exist. It provides that safety, the place for vulnerability, for collaboration, and women to learn how to really work together and help all boats rise. And it's so important to uplift female leaders. But I think for me, you know, I want to have a hand in doing that continuously, but I also want to have a hand in the integration with leaders, diverse leaders around the world. And so I think to be able to give it to capable hands who are still going to run it and grow it, and to have me working on this other side where I'm like, okay, let's keep growing the female leaders, and let's work with, you know, people in the corporate space. Let's work with people in governments. Let's work with people in universities, young leaders, and like help integrate some of the philosophies that we're all teaching.
I love it. Thank you so much. Okay. Last question. I'm going to give you another fork in the road. I don't know why. This is just my Choose Your Own Adventure podcast. All right. For some reason, the weirdest question came to me, which is, what would be a Krav Maga metaphor that you want to pull from what you've been learning these last few months and give people advice for their side hustle or their own business or their career? Because Pivot Podcasts really talk about all three. And then I'll ask my closing question. So that wasn't a choose your own adventure. That's actually, go ahead and answer that
one. I think, you know, Krav Maga is at the end of the day, it's self-defense. And there's something that I believe, and every person who comes to me for advice or help, I talk to them about this and I say, you know, I have taken the full responsibility pledge in my life. And that means full responsibility is you take full responsibility for where you are mentally, physically, financially, spiritually, like whatever is happening in your life, the people in there, the problems, you take full responsibility for solving them or kicking people out who aren't working for you. But where you are at, like, you can't blame anybody else but yourself. So that also means...
And is that pledge, does that pledge I've never heard it stated as a pledge
Well, I created that pledge, and I took the pledge with myself.
I love it. Yes, because I believe in that too, but I've never heard it stated that way. Okay, cool.
So with my students who go through my course, my fundraising course and my personal branding course, I have people take this. It's like, at the end of the day, I can help you with your fundraise, but like you're the one who's going to close the investor.
Yes.
And so to that end, I think part of what attracts me to Krav Maga is like it's the physical side of full responsibility pledge. As women, we have been socialized to generally be weaker. I think physically we will never compete, en masse against any potential attacker. And to learn the skills yourself and say, okay, even though I won't have the advantage weight-wise, but I can learn the strategies and the way these joints move to be able to take care of myself if I need to do that. And I think that also goes to entrepreneurship and business owners, right? It's like if you're not hitting your milestones, your financial milestones, like you've got no one to blame but yourself. If you are annoyed at the person you hired, like you have no one to blame but yourself, and you need to have that conversation. And I think the moment you realize that and you take that pledge, you also bring back your own agency, because you're like, I brought this problem upon myself, but now I can solve it.
It's a funny way of moving through the world, because I live by this as well. And sometimes we're all human. Sometimes my first reaction is, I'm so annoyed. This person is annoying me. They're doing something that's bothering me. It doesn't matter in work, in life, walking down the street. But then the second I remember, I'm like, that has nothing to do with anything. Like, I will always be bothered if I let other people bother me in any capacity. So the harder thing to do is say, this is my responsibility. This is on me, especially in business.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is a direct reflection, but business, relationships, that the strategy of sort of blaming other people just doesn't work ultimately. And it is so much more empowering. Yeah. Although a little more, it's more work. It's more frustrating, because it's so much easier to just be annoyed at someone else than it is to say, Michael, my husband, makes fun of me for, I would say so often in the beginning of our relationship, it's on me. It's on me. He's like, who are you? What is this? It's like something I learned through Byron Katie of like, I'd say, well, it's on me. It's my thing to fix. And he was, in a way, he got annoyed. Like, it's okay. We can have a conversation, but I really did everything I could to try to, it's on me it. So now that became one word. It's on me.
It's also actually on that point too. It's when you talk about, other people frustrating you or whatnot, like in Krav Maga, you're practicing a person physically like coming and attacking you from behind or choking you, and you're like, how do I get out? And with startups or just business owners, like every day there's angry emails, there's all this stuff that's flying at you, and most people react and they go up and down, up and down, up and down, and highs, lows. And the other thing, if this is Krav Maga and something's happening to you, if you go crazy and you react and you don't stay calm, you've already lost.
There it is.
And so this emotional reaction that we have to everything that comes at us is this practice of how do you create greater space between the external stimuli and your response.
That's huge.
And it's the ability and the learning to do that. What you do physically translates to what you do mentally, and vice versa. And my ability now to kind of stay the course and like see what my vision is, and it's like all this other stuff people can say no, they're like, I don't believe in it. I'm like, it's fine, because you're just kind of noise, and I'm not going to react to it because I don't feel like you're being productive to what I want.
Exactly. There was one time, I've told this story one other time on the podcast, so forgive me if you've already heard it, but I was walking down the street of New York City with a guy that I was dating. He wasn't from New York City, so this will explain his reaction a little bit. And we were probably being too affectionate. Someone walking the other direction threw popcorn in our face. And he got infuriated and wanted to go chase the guy down, and he was like ruining his mood. Whereas I was kind of laughing it off, like, F it, who cares? Like, if you're gonna let every crazy person in the streets of New York kind of like get you off balance, it's gonna be it's gonna be really hard to live here. And I remember thinking, just because some guy didn't have the maturity and he threw popcorn in our face, like, if you stoop down to his level now, if you let that guy that thinks it's appropriate to throw popcorn at a stranger, if you let him dictate your mood, where are you? and I understand he was trying to be protective, but it was such a clear example of you either get rocked up and down emotionally, like you said, or you're kind of stooping to someone else's level, which rise above, like there's just, anyway, so that I kind of, that example really stuck in my mind. Yeah. So I'm like, oh man, you got to just shake that off.
Yeah, it's like when you control yourself emotionally,
not take it personally,
and people, if people can't affect you with their negative, like with whatever they're trying to provoke you with, you have all the power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you maintain the equanimity. It's one of my favorite words in life. Last question. If you could leave listeners, I always like to leave with one experiment or something they could try in their own life. And I'm wondering if you could connect it to the Enoughness podcast or principle. What's been one practice that has helped you cultivate that muscle of enoughness?
Well, one thing is, everyone always talks about the gratitude journal and, writing down 3 things you're grateful for. And I had tried that. And one thing I noticed after doing it for about a month was that I was always grateful for external things. I was like, I'm grateful for the fact that I wake up in a warm bed. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my friends. And it's like, and I realized that I was never grateful for myself. And so I did this experiment where I, for a period of time, I would write my gratitude journal, except it was what I'm grateful for myself. And it was like, I'm grateful that and you can't repeat it. So you're like, I'm grateful that I'm intelligent. I'm grateful that I am good at this. I'm grateful that, and then you start finding I'm grateful that I held that door open for this person.
That's so nice.
And then you get to a point where you're just like, should I tell this story? Anyway,
that's always a yes.
Okay, so I was at Burning Man, and it's sometimes there's porta potties. It's like really hard, and you have to like shower in weird ways. And I was like, there's one you have to like squat in a way, and I was like, I'm really grateful that I have really strong legs from gymnastics, so that I can squat properly, so that I'm able to do. And so it became really detailed, and I was like, and I started. Like that became my mental frame. I was like, find things I'm grateful for about myself. And
I love that.
Yeah, and that really built it up.
I love that. I had one yoga class that I took over 10 years ago, and the teacher, so almost every yoga class, usually it should end with Shavasana, corpse pose, you're lying flat on the ground, and then most teachers will transition you into a fetal position with laying, like let's say, on your right arm as if you're resting your head on a pillow, and then you transition up to sitting. And while we were curled in the fetal position, she said, what's one thing you want to acknowledge yourself for in this moment? And no one had ever really asked that in a yoga class or kind of guided us. Even teachers will say, what are you grateful for? Or thank your body for its practice today. But it was so powerful that I started to every single time, whether I'm doing a self-practice at home or I'm taking another person's class, every time in that transitional moment after Shavasana, lying in a fetal position before I sit up, I think about, what do I want to acknowledge myself for? It was very powerful because I can relate to so much of what you said about enoughness. Mm-hmm. And it might start as broad strokes, but even for me now, it's like, I want to acknowledge myself just that I showed up, that I bothered to move today. Like always, there's something very small on that level, and it does build. Yeah. So I'm really glad that you said that. Yeah. Thank you. Lisa, this has been so fun to chat with you. Where can people find you if they want to keep in touch?
So you can find me on Instagram. It's also my Twitter handle is Lisa Wang Wins, and my website is lisawang.co.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Yay. I'll write that down.
Yeah, she got a full one in there.
Yeah.